In the picturesque Pine Creek Valley, nestled among the majestic mountains of Wyoming, a 50-year-old man named Jack Raven had recently settled. To the locals, he was just a quiet farmer who usually kept to himself. Only a few noticed his military bearing and sharp, observant gaze that assessed every detail around him. No one in the valley knew that the hard-working farmer was once the legendary commander of the elite Delta Force unit, with the call sign Shadow, a ghost who arrives silently and disappears without a trace. On a frosty morning, Jack was patrolling the borders of his land, accompanied by his loyal German shepherd, Atlas. With a trained eye, he spotted fresh tire tracks in the softened soil. The deep marks clearly belonged to heavy vehicles not owned by any locals. Something was happening in the valley, and it was clearly not a good sign. His neighbor, Sarah Foster, confirmed the worst fears. A Mexican cartel had recently appeared in the valley. The criminals were methodically buying out farms, and those who refused to sell were intimidated until they gave in. 7 properties had already fallen into the hands of the criminals over the past month. For Jack, this wasn't just information. It was a tactical assessment. His farm was located on a strategically important stretch of land that controlled the main road and several access routes into the valley. It was obvious the cartel would come for him sooner or later. Back at home, Jack opened a hidden cache he had installed when he first bought the land. His friends called it paranoia. Jack called it preparation. Beneath a layer of ordinary tools were concealed military communication gear, weapons, tactical equipment. Everything needed in case the situation spiraled out of control. He had hoped he'd never need them, but years of service had taught him always to be ready for the worst. Throughout the day, Jack watched as black cartel SUVs slowly drove past his gates, surveying the area. They were clearly choosing their next target. Jack began calling his old teammates, men who had fought alongside him in places not found on any map, in missions the world would never know about. Hunter Raven, their sniper, was the first to respond. Then came Dustin Boomer, their explosives expert, Eric Ghost, their communications specialist, and Marcus Dock, their medic. Together, they had always been a force to be reckoned with. Even now, when each of them was over 50. The cartel had no idea what kind of retirees they were about to face. Jack's plans changed abruptly the next day when he learned of an attack on his friend Michael Baker. Michael had been the only person in the valley who had welcomed him with open arms, helped fix his barn, and taught him the ways of local farming. Now, Michael lay in a coma after a brutal beating by cartel men, all because he refused to sell land that had belonged to his family for generations. At the hospital, Jack met Michael's wife Alice and their 14-year-old son, Tommy. Despite the shock, the boy displayed remarkable attention to detail, describing the attackers clearly: a scar on one man's face, a crown tattoo on another's neck, prayer beads in the third's hand. Jack instantly recognized a rare talent in Tommy: the ability to notice what others miss under stress. Knowing the danger the family was in, Jack insisted that Alice and Tommy stay with him while Michael was in the hospital. He knew his farm was the only place where they'd be safe when the cartel came. Now it was personal. Not just about defending land. It was about protecting innocent people, preserving an entire way of life in the valley. Jack gathered his team at an abandoned sawmill, explaining the severity of the situation. Everyone understood that they had far less time to prepare than expected. The cartel was acting much more aggressively than they had anticipated. On the way home with Michael's family, Jack spotted the familiar black SUVs heading toward Miller's farm, which the cartel had recently acquired. He placed Alice and Tommy in the guest house, on the most secure part of the property. Loyal Atlas immediately took the boy under his protection, not leaving his side, as if understanding the importance of his mission. That evening, sitting on the porch, Tommy directly asked Jack if he had really been just a farmer. Jack didn't lie. He said he used to be someone else, but now he just wanted to live in peace like everyone in the valley. When the boy asked if he could stop the men who hurt his father, Jack made a firm promise. He would do everything to bring justice. The next morning, just as Jack had predicted, 3 black SUVs pulled up to his farm. 5 men in expensive suits stepped out. Their leader, Raul El Corte Mendez, smiled a businesslike smile that thinly veiled the mind of a predator. Jack counted 2 more men remaining in the vehicles, their hands ready to grab weapons at any moment. Mendez introduced himself as a representative of an investment group interested in buying Jack's land. He didn't even haggle and offered $3 million in cash, a sum far above market value. Jack politely but firmly refused, explaining that the land was not for sale. Mendez's smile tightened. He shifted to veiled threats, mentioning that the valley was changing, and those who didn't adapt often encountered accidents, especially stubborn old men who couldn't recognize a good deal. Jack noticed 2 cartel men surveying his land, marking sightlines and possible defensive positions. They weren't real estate agents. They were a recon team, gathering intel for a future assault. During the conversation, Jack deliberately called Mendez by name, even though the man hadn't introduced himself. It was a calculated move, to show he knew more than he let on. Seeing Mendez's momentary confusion, Jack knew he had hit his mark. At the end of the meeting, Mendez ominously remarked how unfortunate it would be if something happened to Atlas. To that, Jack replied with a voice full of military steel. That would be a very serious mistake. Something in his tone made Mendez hesitate. They expected a simple old farmer they could intimidate or bribe. Instead, they encountered something that made them cautious. After the uninvited guests left, Jack activated his real security system. Hidden cameras in the trees covered all approach routes. Motion sensors tracked the perimeter. Everything fed into a command center he had set up in the basement, a leftover habit from years of planning for worst-case scenarios. Jack knew time was short. The cartel wouldn't wait 24 hours as promised. They had seen something in him that alarmed them. They would be back, and in greater numbers. But Jack and his team were ready. It wasn't just a patch of land at stake. It was the lives of many innocent people, including the family now under his protection. Night fell, silent and starry. Jack positioned his team at prearranged spots. Hunter took the sniper tower to the north with a perfect view. Dustin rigged key zones with traps for uninvited guests. Eric set up a comms interception system. Marcus prepared the medical station in the basement, ready for anything. The first alarm sounded around midnight. The surveillance system detected a convoy of 20 vehicles approaching the valley. It looked like the cartel had mobilized all its forces, no longer pretending to be investors or businessmen. The operation had begun. Raul Mendez stepped out of the armored SUV, signaling his men with sharp gestures. "Surround the farm. No one leaves here alive," he ordered in Spanish. When the enemy reached the point Jack had marked, the farmer gave the command. Dustin triggered the first set of charges. The ground exploded beneath the lead vehicles, hurling them into the air in a whirlwind of dirt and shredded metal. Before the dust could settle, Hunter opened fire from his concealed position. 2 cartel soldiers dropped before they even realized they were under attack. "What the hell?" Mendez shouted, diving for cover. "Where are they shooting from?" The quiet night instantly turned to chaos. Jack's team had carefully prepared defensive positions, and now the locals had joined the fight. Every time the cartel forces tried to regroup, they were met with crossfire. Jack moved like a ghost in the dark, years of combat experience guiding his every step. He caught 2 cartel men off guard, disarmed one, and used him as a shield against the other's fire. Both went down silently. Who the hell are these guys? One of the cartel fighters screamed into the radio. Something's wrong here. They're too organized. Mendez's voice cut through the chaos. They're professionals. Fall back to the vehicles. Reform into defensive positions. But it was too late. Jack triggered another series of charges, cutting off the cartel's escape route and trapping them in the kill zone. Hunter's rifle spoke again, methodically taking out the remaining threats. The first wave of the cartel's assault collapsed. What started as a confident advance had become a desperate fight for survival. 8 of the original 20 vehicles were now burning. Of the 40 men Mendez had brought, less than half were still fighting. "Full retreat," Mendez ordered. "Fall back to the rally point, now." "I don't think so," Jack replied calmly. Hunter's rifle fired 3 times, and the tires of the remaining vehicles exploded, sealing the cartel fighters inside the trap. "El Fantasma's going to kill us all," Mendez muttered, realizing the trap they had walked into. Jack stepped out of the shadows behind Mendez. "El Fantasma should have done better recon," he said. "Should have asked who owns this farm." Mendez spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. Jack's strike was precise and efficient. The cartel leader dropped unconscious as the rest of his men surrendered. "Area secure," Hunter reported. "No runners." Marcus began giving first aid to the cartel's wounded, stabilizing them. According to Eric, more cartel reinforcements were on the way, about 20 minutes out. This time, they were bringing heavy weapons and larger numbers. Jack's team quickly regrouped, checking weapons and resupplying ammo. The night was still young, and this was only the beginning. The real battle lay ahead. "Just like old times," Marcus said while dressing a cartel member's wound. "Better," Jack replied, checking his magazines. "This time we fight on our terms, on our ground, and this time we end it for good." The second wave hit like a thunderstorm. Automatic fire lit up the night, and high-caliber weapons tore through Jack's outer defenses. The cartel moved with professional precision, using suppressing fire to advance. This was no longer the disorganized rush of the first wave. This was a coordinated military assault. "Multiple groups, 9 o'clock, Hunter reported, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "They're using proper fire and maneuver tactics. These aren't ordinary cartel thugs." Jack watched through a thermal scope as El Fantasma's men, the mysterious cartel leader's elite, set up support positions. "Former Mexican Special Forces," he confirmed. "You see how they move? They've done this before." A rocket ripped through the darkness and exploded against Jack's barn. The structure held, reinforced for exactly this kind of scenario. But the message was clear. The cartel wasn't playing anymore. They deployed incendiary weapons, trying to slush Jack's team from their fortified positions. The night lit up with bright flashes and flames, turning the battlefield into a blazing hell. "They're getting desperate," Hunter noted, shifting as fire engulfed his previous sniper nest. "They're making more mistakes." "Careful," Jack warned. "Desperate men are unpredictable." The cartel's elite, Los Fantasmas, breached the inner perimeter, moving with deadly accuracy toward the command center. Jack moved to intercept, but was pinned down by well-coordinated fire. "Need assistance," Jack called out, surprisingly calm despite bullets slicing the air around him. "On it," Dustin replied. The ground erupted under the death squad, not from explosives, but from compressed air and mud. It was a non-lethal but disorienting blast, shattering the cartel's formation. Jack seized the moment of confusion to close the distance. The fight was short but brutal. The death squad members were skilled shooters, but Jack had spent decades mastering close-quarters combat. The first man went down from a crushing throat strike. The second managed to land a solid hit before Jack's elbow found a nerve cluster behind his ear. The third was tougher, clearly a hand-to-hand specialist. Impressive, the man said with an accent, taking a combat stance. But you're still just an old man. Jack's answer was a lightning-fast combo that left the cartel expert unconscious on the ground. Age and cunning, kid, Jack muttered. A new threat appeared on the horizon. The cartel had brought in heavy artillery, an armored vehicle with a 20mm autocannon, capable of tearing through even Jack's reinforced walls. This wasn't an assault anymore. It was extermination. "Hunter, can you take the shot?" Jack asked. "Negative, too well shielded. I need a new angle." Jack made a quick decision. The cannon was deadly, but it had weak spots. "Dustin, remember Somalia? That arms depot with the tanks?" "Yeah, that was... Oh, I like where this is going. I can do it. Give me 2 minutes." El Fantasma's voice cut through the air, furious and commanding. "This is what happens to those who defy the cartel. We'll turn this place to ashes." The autocannon continued its destructive barrage, but Jack had faced worse in his life. "Eric, patch me into their frequency. Time to explain something to our friend. Channel open." Jack's voice was cold and professional. "That's an impressive gun, Russian-made, probably stolen from a military depot. But it's not nearly as effective against what I've prepared for you." "You're doomed," El Fantasma shouted. "Your defenses are crumbling." Look to your left. The cartel boss did, just in time to witness Dustin's surprise. The old barn they thought was simply burning suddenly revealed its grim secret. The entire structure had been rigged as a massive directional blast, channeling all its force directly at the vehicle with the gun. The explosion wasn't meant to destroy. That would have been too risky. Instead, it unleashed a devastating shockwave, flipping the vehicle, disabling the weapon, and scattering El Fantasma's men as they dove for cover. "That was just our excuse to stay calm," Jack announced. "Push harder, and that's when we stopped being polite." El Fantasma immediately ordered the execution of all the farmers, but there was a trace of fear in his voice. His men were dying or surrendering one by one. His best fighters were neutralized, and his heavy weapons were being systematically destroyed. Jack gave the signal to initiate the final phase. For El Fantasma and his crew, the night was just beginning to turn into a nightmare. At one point, the bandits thought they had nearly won, forcing Jack's team to retreat. Instead, the uninvited guests were walking straight into the trap the farmer had prepared from the beginning. Jack watched as El Fantasma's forces clustered around the command vehicle, exactly where he wanted them. The cartel boss thought he was being smart by consolidating his remaining strength. In reality, he had simply gathered all his men into the perfect kill zone. "Execute Phoenix Protocol," Jack ordered. His team confirmed immediately. They had rehearsed this scenario countless times during their active service. "Get ready for a little fireworks," Dustin announced. "The charges we didn't use earlier are already in place." Hunter's voice came in, calm and precise. "Perfect vantage point. All their top dogs are in my sights." "Remember," Jack reminded them, "we need survivors. They have to deliver a message to the cartel." The counterattack began with surgical precision. Dustin's charges detonated in sequence, not to kill, but to block all escape routes. Sudden walls of fire and smoke herded the cartel forces exactly where Jack wanted them. "What are they doing?" El Fantasma demanded, watching as his carefully positioned men were suddenly trapped in a deadly crossfire. "They're giving you a lesson in real combat," Jack replied over the cartel's radio frequency. "Pay attention. This is how professionals operate." Hunter's rifle spoke first, taking out the cartel's comms gear with 3 pinpoint shots. Then the engines of their vehicles failed, each one disabled with methodical efficiency. The cartel forces were now deaf, blind, and immobile. "You think this changes anything?" El Fantasma screamed, but panic had crept into his voice. I still have fighters. I still have weapons. Not anymore, Jack replied, as Eric's equipment completely jammed their radio communications. Right now, your reinforcements are being arrested. Funny how everything changes when someone tips off the federal authorities about a cartel operation. By dawn, the battle was over. The cartel's forces were thoroughly crushed. The survivors sat tied with zip ties under Marcus's watchful eye. State police and the FBI arrived to arrest the criminals and gather evidence of their crimes. Jack watched as the rising sun lit his damaged but undefeated farm. The cartel had brought their best, former special forces, professional killers. Just a handful of old men not only defended the farm but crushed the cartel's grand plan to establish a major drug hub in the valley. You know, Dustin said thoughtfully, watching the last FBI vehicle vanish down the driveway. Those abandoned cartel outposts might be worth bidding on at the auction. Tactically solid positions. Jack smiled. The soldier in him appreciated the strategy. Control of key terrain. Creation of a secure perimeter around the valley. The farmer in him liked the idea of keeping good land in good hands. One thing's certain, Punter added, scanning the horizon through sniper-trained eyes. No one's going to look at this valley the same way again. Sometimes the best deterrent is uncertainty. The idea that behind every farmer, every rancher, there might be something far more dangerous than they seem. In the weeks that followed, Pine Creek Valley began to change. Jack's team bought the abandoned cartel farms at auction. Hunter purchased the old Wilson estate with a commanding view of the entire valley. Marcus began restoring the abandoned clinic, offering medical help to locals. Eric installed advanced communication systems throughout the valley, posing as an amateur radio enthusiast. Dustin upgraded farming equipment, making it tougher, more efficient, and quietly integrating defense features. But the most important change wasn't in infrastructure. It was in people. Jack began training the locals, not to turn them into soldiers, but to help them become more alert, more organized, better able to defend their way of life. Farmers and ranchers learned to spot suspicious strangers, coordinate responses, and warn each other of threats. Michael Baker woke up 3 weeks after the attack. His recovery was slow but steady, especially under Marcus's care. When he finally returned home, his farm had been rebuilt by the collective efforts of the valley. Tommy, now trained by Jack in the basics of surveillance and security, had become one of the most valuable members of the new defense network. Eyes and ears that saw what others missed. Rumors of the impregnable valley spread quickly through criminal circles. No one tried to. Pine Creek became known as the Ghost Valley, a place where even the most dangerous criminals disappeared without a trace. One day, the county sheriff asked Jack if this story would ever end. Jack simply smiled, watching the peaceful fields and grazing cattle. On the surface, the valley remained a quiet agricultural corner of Wyoming. But beneath that peaceful facade lay an invisible shield, not a military base, not a gated compound, but a community that had learned to protect itself. That evening, sitting on his porch, watching the sunset, Jack reflected on the valley's transformation. They hadn't just repelled a cartel attack. They had created something unique. A place where ordinary people, united by purpose, had become a force to be reckoned with. A place where Jack's shadowy past, the elusive shadow, had found new meaning, not in war and destruction, but in the protection of peaceful life. Atlas dozed at his feet as lights flickered on across the valley. Each farm now more than just a home, but part of a greater system. Some battles aren't won by the strength of weapons, but by the strength of community. And sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who don't look threatening, until it's far too late.